Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in AML. I'm John Byrne, Chair of the AMLRS Advisory Board.
And I'm Elliot Berman, our Creative Director. We are excited to welcome you to the This Week in AML podcast,
where we explore key news and developments in the global financial crime prevention community.
Hi, John. How are you today?
I'm good, Elliot. How are you doing?
I'm good, too. Thank you. There's a lot going on as usual, but the thing I thought might be worthy of talking about is the White House put out a fact sheet related to something called Summit for Democracy, which is something that the first one was held about a year ago, Progress in the Year of Action. I wondered if you saw that release.
Yeah, I saw it because it's relevant for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that is we're going to talk about toward the end of this is that on December 15th, we're going to be doing what I can't wait for, a very compelling conversation on corruption. So one of the things that the Summit for Democracy talks about, and there's many different things in there. There's things on investments, environmental issues, all sorts of issues. But one of the, and also supporting a free and independent media. So that's obviously always important, but is fighting corruption. And so they list a whole series of actions undertaken in 2022 from the U.S. government's perspective on corruption. And I thought we should let the folks know about a couple of those, because as we know in the financial crime space, corruption sort of begets all sorts of illicit activity because it's all about getting money and power, and that's certainly a way to define corruption.
Yes. Just a little background for our listeners. So there were over 100 partner governments who participated in the original summit about a year ago. There's also an announcement that a second summit is going to be held in March of 2023. And the U.S. is going to be a co-host with government officials from Costa Rica, the Netherlands, Republic of Korea, and Republic of Zambia. A pretty diverse group of co-hosts. And a lot of the work that we're going to talk about in a moment is from what has the U.S. been participating in. But there are working groups and all kinds of things going on. And a lot of it, not getting a lot of press, but right. Kind of in many ways, the building blocks and a lot of international cooperation, which is also, I think, very valuable in fighting corruption in particular, but in working toward making democracies healthy, vital, and stable.
Right, and some of the examples they use for what's happened in the past year, the State Department in July appointed the first ever coordinator on global anti-corruption. USAID launched something that they're calling Strengthening Transparency and Accountability Through Investigative Reporting, and that's a $20 million program to support collaborative investigative journalism networks, and we'll mention that again toward the end of this. Innovation becomes pretty important. Obviously, that's something that we've seen the banking regulators talk about just in terms of the financial sector in general, but looking at innovation as a way to combat corruption is also a focus here. And then they go back to something we've talked a lot about, and that's the passage of the Corporate Transparency Act.
Right. And then, registries and infrastructure to share information and all those things. When I was reading that section, I was thinking, so I wonder if down the line this leads to a global registry or a standard for national level registries, but the standard becomes the same around the globe, so that transparency is really the same wherever you are, or at least among these participating countries. That's a long lift, I understand.
That's a big lift.
I know, but
in large part because of as the jurisdictional differences in privacy and other issues. But anyway, it's certainly a worthy goal. I don't disagree with that.
Yep.
So they do point out that part of the importance of the passage of the CTA will be an ability to, besides the registry, the development of regulations is sort of mixed issues. But in AMLA also, they're looking about dealing with real estate purchases and those sorts of things. But the other thing that I sort of forgot about, but we might have mentioned this in an earlier conversation. Back in March, the Treasury launched the Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Rewards Program. So that pays obviously rewards, and so Treasury and state will continue to use what they're calling accountability tools in addition to recovery rewards like sanctions and visa restrictions and all of that. But I had forgotten that they did that. But obviously, seizing assets and making some of those assets available to as rewards will obviously hopefully help people who are diligent know they've got a place where they can provide that information. So I thought that was interesting. They do reference, as you mentioned, international successes of multinational, multilateral engagements that our government is doing with FATF, the UN. In December, it hasn't occurred yet, I don't believe, but the International Anti-Corruption Conference, I think that's actually going on this week in DC, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe we can report on it next week if that's in fact the case. I do think it's coming up shortly, and if it's not this week, I think it's next week, and that should be interesting. There should be some takeaways from that we can talk about.
Yep. Yes. And then there's there continues to be the effort to strengthen our own work here so that we can be a good cooperative partner, which is, a critical effort. I saw a word in here I wasn't sure I would ever see: decleptification.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah. But I don't mean to make light of any of this, but there's a lot of work. I think, as I said earlier, one of the things that struck me is how much is going on, and you and I, who follow this space pretty actively, we're aware of a fair amount of it, but there's also a fair amount that's going on where at the moment it's not for the purpose of shining a light on it. It's for the purpose of getting the work done.
Right. The last thing that they mentioned under the corruption umbrella is holding Russia accountable, and they talk about the creation back in March from Attorney General Garland, the Task Force Klepto-Capture, which is an interagency law enforcement task force designed to deal with that, and that was created directly in response to Russia's unprovoked attack and war in Ukraine. So that's going on there. Going after oligarchs continues to be a priority. That's obviously important, with all these yachts and homes and condos that are owned by these individuals that are avoiding the law for a variety of reasons, going after them and seizing those assets. So all those things have been it's been a fairly strong and successful 2022. Just in that part under the democracy rubric that this was created for, but the corruption successes, I think, are pretty straightforward and pretty clear.
Yes. Again, we're focusing on the corruption component in this fact sheet, but there are other significant efforts going on related to defending free and fair elections and inclusive political processes, and advancing technology to support democracy, and bolstering democratic reformers in those places where the fight to even establish democracy is still going on.
Yeah, and just real quick before we talk about things we want to plug, we had to make a tough choice what we're going to talk about this week. Also this week, I just want to highlight very quickly that Department of Homeland Security did update their National Terrorism Advisory system bulletin, which was set to expire. I didn't realize the bulletins expire, but they were on the 30th. So they came out with an updated one. I would just tell folks to take a look at it. It obviously talks about all the risks from domestic and international terrorism. So we would suggest you take a look at that when you get a chance.
Yes, and one of the key components of that one is a continued focus on the violence, domestic violence related to religious beliefs and racial profiling. So continues to be a major focus of HSI, both in their domestic and international activities. So, John, you alluded to our December 15th webinar. Why don't you give a little more in-depth conversation about that?
So yeah, under the broad definition of corruption, we're very excited to have two investigative journalists that are connected to the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project that do a lot of excellent work. They worked on the Pandora Papers, FinCEN Files, Panama Papers. We'll reference some of that, but we also want to talk to them specifically about something they've created called a Russian asset tracker. Talk a little bit about that. They'll talk about the work they did with the so-called Swiss secrets. And we're going to ask them their thoughts about what the EU just did in court, saying that they're going to limit access to beneficial ownership registries. And that's certainly something that the investigative journalism community is opposed to, because they get a lot of good information so they can, pursue important stories based on what's in these registries. So that, that there's a debate here to a degree. The registry here was never going to be open to the public, but how the access was going to work in terms of government and the private sector is also to be determined. But so we're going to ask them their thoughts on this. And also, as I always like to ask investigative journalists, what do they think how we're doing? We being the AML community, what's their sense of how things are going? Because obviously it's a major challenge for all of us. So December 15th, 1 o'clock Eastern time, very excited about that. And that'll end our webinar programs for 2022.
Yes, but we have a full schedule for already in the works for 2023, and we'll start to advertise those as well. Remember, you can register for the December webinar at our website, amlrightsource.com. So please do that. And John, I'm looking forward to the piece on the to the session on the 15th. We also have some other things in the works. John's done some great interviews, and we're working on some podcasts jointly with Homeland Security Investigations about some of their current initiatives that we think are important for our listeners to know about. So watch for those to post over the next during the month. And we'll be back with another conversation next week. John, you be well. I think I may see you. I think you're coming my way between now and our next recording.
Coming to watch the Golden Eagles of Marquette University, who just boat raced Baylor, and nobody expected it. They'll be playing their in-state rivals, Wisconsin. So can't wait, and I'm sure we'll find a chance to connect. So looking forward to it. I can deal with the cold as long as I'm watching college basketball. So
that's okay. Bring your Marquette stocking cap and travel safely.
All right, take care.
All right, bye-bye.